Welcome to What the World Needs Now with hosts Tom Whisinnand and Josh Monroe. We hope that you're able to leave feeling encouraged and ready for another day of changing lives in the field of education as we speak with inspirational teachers from across the nation and world about what keeps their spark lit.
In this episode, we talk with Stephanie Hunt, an English teacher from West High School in Salt Lake City, Utah, about her son Adam and how he inspires her to expand her classroom to reach across the globe. Without any further ado, Stephanie Hunt.
Stephanie, thank you so much for being here with us tonight. For our listeners that don't have the privilege of knowing who you are, could you tell us a little bit about where you're from and what's your role in education?
Yeah, so I'm Stephanie Hunt. I live in North Salt Lake, Utah. I teach in a great district, Salt Lake City School District. We are very diverse in our school district. It's one of the most diverse school districts in the state of Utah, and that's really, I love that part. I spent 12 years in middle school, and this is my first year in high school, which is kind of fun. I'm an adjunct professor at our community college, and I teach that online, and that makes it kind of fun. I have the yin and the yang of all of it. I teach language arts. I teach social studies to our honors students, and I also teach our incoming refugee and immigrant students, and I do the ESL classes with them and their language arts classes. So it's a pretty eclectic kind of classroom. You can never know what's going on that way. But I love it. I love that change. And the next class comes in and it's something totally new and different. And I love that part. I've only been in teaching for about 14 years. So I went into it later in life. This is not what I wanted to be doing with my life when I was your age. I had these grand things of being an attorney and doing all of that. But partway through and raising our family, our oldest son, who was set to go play college football and was being recruited really heavily, suddenly passed away at a game. And dealing with all of that and with his teammates and with his brothers and sisters, one day I happened to find some of his homework that he had just shoved in under his bed and pulled it out, and he had his list of goals, and his goals were just like what every teenage boy was like. I'm going to take my team to state, and I'm going to go play in the pros, and I'm going to marry the cutest girl and have all these babies. But at the bottom of it was, but what I really want to do is I want to teach kids in middle school. And I want them to know that they should have faith in themselves, that they can do the incredible. And I closed it up and decided that was the last thing I could do for him as a mom. And so I went back to college the next term and finished it out. And so the saying in our family is he's the real teacher. I do the grading, I do the planning, and then he does the teaching, and then we're done. But it's been an unusual journey, but I wouldn't trade where I'm at right now for anything.
I don't know about you, Josh, but that right there, I got the tears. I don't know what to say. That's one of the best, heart-touching reasons anybody has ever given to the next, like, what inspired you to pursue a career in education? I don't know if it gets any truer than that. Oh my God.
He was a pretty incredible young man. I'm still surprised that I was his mom or his father was his dad, because he turned out way better than what our parenting was. But it's been a nice thing to always remember on those really hard days of teaching, is that I'm not really doing this for me. I'm doing this for him. And so it puts a lot of different perspective, especially when you have that really difficult kid in the classroom and you're ready to quit and say, I'm done. You're going to the counselor's office. I can't do this anymore. And it's like, man, I saw my kid fight in the hospital for 5 weeks. I can fight a couple more hours with this kid and we're going to make it work. And my classroom has a lot of football theme. It just does by the very nature. And so usually when I get new students, they're like, oh, you're the football teacher. And I'm like, I am. But it's been kind of nice too. We try hard to honor those kids and give those kids the dignity that they deserve in the classroom. One of the things that my son did when he was playing football it's always a standout for our family was that he had to work extra hard. He was starting offense, defense. He was a small kid. And their nemesis, their arch rivals, they had lost to them for 14 straight years. And it was called the curse. And in the last few seconds of that game, Adam scored the winning touchdown to beat the curse. And the local media had his picture up, and we always called it our pure joy moment. So for my students, at the end of the year, they are given their assignment to find their pure joy in life. And it might come when they're 40, it might come when they're 20, it might come whenever, it might come when they're 50. And so I show them my file, and I have every student I've ever taught, and it's called their lifetime homework. And in that, they have to notify me when they have that pure joy moment in their life, that they knew that all the hard work, the sweat, the sacrifice was worth it. And then that made it perfect. And then they notify me, and then I check them off my list. And I tell them my last name is Hunt for a reason, because if I don't get that list, I don't get that homework turned in, I will hunt you down. And if I'm dead and gone, my kids will come and hunt you down, because I've got to have that peace. But it's a different way of looking at how I want to send them out of my classroom at the end of the year. And as a result, I have students coming back constantly all the time. And usually they'll just walk in my classroom and pick me up and shake me and say, here it is, this is my homework. And then they go, and my current students just kind of stare and go, do we call the office? Like, what, are we okay? I'm like, it's okay, because you're going to have the same homework. You just are. And it's been a good way for me to honor my son, but also to let the kids know that schooling doesn't end at 3 o'clock when you go out. It still keeps going. So that's our goal, is to have these lifelong learners, right? That's what we would try for.
Absolutely. And you're what an awesome story. And I have so many questions that I'd want to ask. Just what a beautiful thing for you, your son, and your students too, to constantly be reflecting on their life, really, and finding that moment that I really liked that. I like that, and I'm gonna sit on it for a little bit and think about how can I bring that into my 5th grade class, because that's really what we want from kids, right? Is for them to be able to identify moments in their life that are bigger than themselves, or that build your identity and turn you into who you are.
I think so. I think, I look, it's such a different generation than when I was a student, even when I was a college student. And there is so much that just beats them down. Like, there's so much there that's just going against them. And, I've taught my refugee kids, we call them my ducks, because we learned in class one day, there's 26 different kinds of ducks in the world, and they're all different, and they all quack different, do everything. But the one thing that they have in common is their heart. It's exactly the same heart. And so we always called ourselves the ducks. And some of my ducks have been in some of the most trauma-filled refugee camps in the world. And they've watched parents die. They've experienced the worst in their short little tiny lifespan. And so we're always like, okay, so how are we going to take that and we're going to build on it? So you have this moment where you look like my son in that end zone. That's our goal. That's what we want to do. And it might be, when you hold your first child, but it might be when you're the first person that walks across that stage and gets your diploma. And that might be when that is. And it's just been, I do better if I have a touchstone, and that's my touchstone. I always do better with touchstones. And so that's where we go.
I think that's amazing. And I love the idea of planting a seed, right? I'm going to plant the seed of finding your beautiful moment and then having them come back and touch base with you about that seed that they planted. And you know, if it's going to be a beautiful moment, it's going to be wonderful. And I
Yeah.
think that's really so powerful that you have really found a way to keep humanity and in the forefront of learning and keep being a human in the forefront of learning. And yes, you teach, language arts, but it's really about what being a human is. And I think that's just
Uh,
absolutely, absolutely beautiful. Um,
well, I don't know. I don't know. It just works for me. And it works in my classroom. And we are kind of a crazy bunch in my classroom where we watch football highlights a lot on Friday before our team goes to play. Um, and you get extra credit if you can tell me which play the referee really messed up for our team. But but I don't know. I just think these kids are just facing some pretty unique challenges that we never had to do,
mhm,
whether it's with COVID or unemployed. I mean, I've got kids that are working and helping out with family, and you there's just got to be something to draw them in because there's a lot of reasons for them not to show up.
mhm,
And
mhm,
so sitting down and doing a worksheet sometimes isn't the best
right,
for these kids.
right. Um, so you shared your story about your son and how he inspires you on an ongoing basis. What other ways do you stay inspired? Are there activities that you find time to do? Are there books that you've read? Are there certain people that maybe you follow on social media or that have shifted and changed your view of teaching? How do you stay
Yeah, a
inspired?
lot. I had a great professor at the university I went to by the name of Ricky McCandless. And we've stayed in close contact. In fact, we've done a lot of project-based learning that have involved Africa and things with my students. And so during our time when I'm not in the classroom, we're just working together to like figure out like what's our next step and what are we going to do. And I have this amazing family that keep me busy and keep me grounded and keep reminding me that takeout is not an option every night of the week. And they do all of those pieces. And our families have been fortunate enough that we've been able to do a little bit of traveling and do some things together. And but it's all those little pieces that just kind of make up that big whole.
I didn't know takeout 5 days a week wasn't that's not good. We're not
Seriously,
supposed
I
to
didn't either. But apparently,
do that.
apparently my son says, other mothers cook. And I was just like, sorry, I don't know what to tell you. But I got a 2-for-1 coupon. We're keeping it. We got to use it.
Oh, I love turning to the I don't know if well Little Caesars is all over. You
Oh
gotta have
yeah.
the hot and ready's. I mean,
Yep.
that's the easiest thing to do. Walk in, $5, whole pizza.
Yep.
What?
There you go. It
Oh,
works.
Stephanie, you touched on for a second some of the work that you've done in Africa with your students. Could you go into a little bit more detail about that? Because I think the story behind it's totally awesome.
Oh, I love this part, and we're getting ready to do phase 2 right now. So I'm super pumped about it. And my professor Ricky McCandless, that we've been good friends. She works with an incredible man by the name of John Benyon, and they had a foundation, and they had computers donated, and they decided we're gonna go find this place in Ghana, and we're just gonna travel around and see if there's an educational need where people could use this, and how can we set up some structure to help the education, because for a lot of the small villages in Ghana, the dropout rate is 98% after junior high, because high school costs money and you can't afford it, and no technology and no nothing. And so she had just come back, and they'd found this little tiny village called Adequambe, and they put in 10 computers. The village chief came down to give it its blessing, and they actually had to draw a mouse on the chalk, on some painted chalk, because they literally have nothing. They have no books. Their desks are just what they make from. There's no doors, there's no power, there's no bathroom, there's no running water. I mean, it is rough. And they taught him how to use the internet. And the chief was just fascinated because the first thing they showed him was a surgery on a beating heart. And he was just like, that's in me. And it was just this moment. So she comes back from there and we're having hot chocolate during Christmas break. And she says, how you doing? I'm like, I am so tired. I need a break. And she said, well, this is where I've been and this is what I'm doing. And I'm like, way to show me up. I just graded papers. And she said, well, these kids for the first time now have access to the internet. And in this moment, I said, well, then why don't my students start being their pen pals through the internet? Let's tie some curriculum into it, like teach them how to write and how to do that piece. And let's start working back and forth. And she said, okay. And in her true fashion, within 24 hours, I had 32 email addresses in Abercrombie, Ghana for these students. So I matched them up with my students and we talked about it. And then we showed a lot of pictures of what it looks like there and what these kids face on a daily basis. And if they don't graduate, then their life will be selling things in the black market. And I mean, the poverty level is nothing I've ever seen before. And we've been to a few places in the world and this one was just nothing. And so in my classroom, we're always working at being self-directed. And that's a big comment like, oh, that was so self-directed. Good for you. And one of my students, bless her heart, she sat there and she just cried through the whole thing. And she said, we're smarter than what we look like. We might be middle school kids, but we are a lot smarter. And I said, well, of course you are. You're brilliant. You're mine. And she said, so why don't we make it better? And I said, well, then how do you think we should do it? And so then we recreated the curriculum wheel for about 2 weeks. And so it wasn't about giving handouts. It was about helping that village become self-sustaining because that's what would thrive and that's what would go. So they started emailing their friends in Ghana and finding out like what a typical day was and what was going on. And then we brought all the pieces back together and we did compare and contrast and we did all of those language arts things that language arts teachers do. And they said, most of the dads are wood carvers. And I said, okay. So then we looked up the price of like animal carvings and masks and they were like, oh my gosh, this is a lot of money. And I'm like, yeah, it is. But in Abercrombie, it's not. And then I said, so now you guys go back to your groups and problem solve and tell me how you think we can do this. And within just minutes, they were like, we should have the dads carve animals and carvings for us and we'll sell them. And then we'll send the money back to Abercrombie. And I said, that's brilliant. But now we have to look at policy. We have to look at fundraising. We have to, and so all of this just kept growing into this huge curriculum project. But at the same time, all of a sudden, my kids who had been unengaged with everything became instantly engaged. And they would send me emails at midnight going, I've just been thinking about this and I've got this great idea. I think we could do this. And I think we could get our 2 rival football teams and whoever donates the most, they get a mask. And I said, okay, well, that's great, but we've got to get the carvings over here. And one of my shyest, quietest kids who had not been engaged for most of the year just said, you know, my grandma works for Delta. I bet Delta would send them over. And I said, can you call her? And she goes, right now? And I said, yeah, right now. Can you put it on speakerphone? And she said, yeah. And then we said, okay, how are you going to be an effective communicator right now with your grandma so we can make this happen? And so we helped her out with writing and what to say. And she got on there and her grandmother said, I will make some calls. And we said, can you call us back? And she called us back within an hour. And we had passage of all these animal carvings and masks. And then we had one group work on the district policy. And we had one group work on fundraising. That year we raised $4,300.
Wow.
And in Abercrombie, Ghana, a teacher makes $30 a month if they're lucky.
Oh my God.
4,300 was a lot. The next year we raised 5,700. And at the same time, we're employing the families there. And my kids are having a great, like, I am making a change in this world. Like this was like, I didn't even have to say anything. If I was teaching a lesson, they're like, can we stop and talk about Ghana? And I'm like, okay, for just 1 minute. but then we have to go back to curriculum, but we have to go back. But it then became more of like, what else can we do? And the one thing that village needed, there's 5 schools around there, is they didn't have a library. The closest library to them was 150 miles away. And the village only had 10 computers in our school that we had helped put there. We had sent over lots of educational supplies. When it got time to start sending them educational supplies, we ran into the same problem, like, how do we get them there? And so we said, okay, guys, that's your homework. You got to figure this out. One of my kids got on social media and found a guy in Salt Lake who was from Ghana, who was building an amusement park in Accra, which is 100 miles away from our village. And he agreed to ship it as long as it would fit inside the rides that he was sending over. And so my kids learned how to pack a box better than anyone you know. But in that time, we decided what they really needed was a library. And so we worked up a memorandum, my students did. I approved it. We sent it over there with the village, that if we would send X amount every quarter, then the parents would go in, lay the bricks, start building the desks, start doing everything. And in the space of about 3-4 years, we built the nicest library that we ever saw. We sent over 7,000 books. My students contacted every school within probably at 50 miles of our school to ask for donated books. We did that. We packed those, we shipped those. And then it came time that they were going to dedicate the library, and we decided to go. And so a bunch of my principal at that time, him and his family, his 2 kids I taught, and Ricky and my husband, we went over there. It was attended by the Prime Minister of Education in Ghana, the national media, the Archdiocese of the Catholic Church in Africa came down there and gave it its blessing. It was 2 weeks of the hardest work I've ever done. But the great thing is I got to teach in their little broken down rooms with no roofs, no chalkboard, no nothing, where everything's oral. And we would Skype it with my students there. And so I was teaching 2 different lessons at 2 different times. And my kids just became completely, I mean, that was the moment, like, oh, we're all in class together finally. And I'd have to say, okay, now Thomas, you stop talking to so-and-so because you got to focus on me. But at the end of the year, my kids thought, the kids in Africa were greatly blessed. In 5 years, they have turned the dropout rate in that village from 98% down to 12%. Because they created 7 college scholarships, which is about $450 a year to send them on to college. But my kids here, everyone said, oh, the people in Africa really needed this. But my kids here in Salt Lake, they needed it more. They needed to see that a 13-year-old kid can make a difference into a place that they never even knew existed, or in a village they never knew existed. So on the last little part, I took every name of every kid that I worked, we put it inside the library, and it sits there. And my kids still communicate, even though it's been 5 years, they're still best friends. One of the best comments came from one of my kids who was pretty standoffish, and he's like, I don't think they need our help, and they should be able to pull themselves up and do it on their own. I'm like, that's okay. Your assignment is just to email. You got to do it correctly, and the grammar's got to be right. The end of the year, he came to me and he said, this was the best thing that ever happened to me, because if we ever go to war to Ghana, I'm not shooting. And I was like, okay, I'm done. That was my piece. But now I'm up at West High School with 3,000 students. We just got clearance for our Friends of Ghana Club. And this time we are going to build an early childhood care center there. And this time our hope is that we can take 20 of our high school students with us over there when it's finished to work, and spend 2 weeks there. They'll have to pay their own way. It's expensive. It's a lot of shots. But I want them to see what we saw. And I want them to feel what that feels like there, and that they really do make a difference. Our library, the total cost was $12,000.
Wow.
An early childhood care center is going to be like maybe 20,000, but it will service 5 different schools there. So that's our newest. But I'm really big on project-based learning, and this is because you can tie everything into it. And sometimes if you give those kids a reason to read that informational text or write, and you give them this reason for it, they're more likely to do it with heart and really to apply themselves than if I give them something and they go, great, we have to highlight one more article. I'm going to put a smiley face in the bottom, but they're making a huge difference. And that's pretty powerful for a kid that can't yet drive a car, or a kid, you know. So even my kids that don't have the financial means, they're all part of this. Either they're writing announcements for the school news, or they're making posters, or they're helping box and pack, because of our diversity, I have a lot of kids that go without. And so money is not a criteria for being in this project. It's just the intent of your heart of doing this. And so, but it's been pretty amazing. It's not where I thought I would be. I'm just telling you, I'm an old farm girl. We just don't do those kind of things, but it's a pretty incredible way for kids to be connected with curriculum.
Well, and it's yes, it's writing, and yes, it's reading, but like you said, there's so many other problem solving skills that go along with it, and they're life skills, and it's finding connections, you know, and the connections you didn't know were there. My grandma works for Delta. Oh, that's interesting. Well, let me call her. And this is how I show I'm engaged in class. And all of a sudden my engagement is tenfold higher, because now I have skin in the game, because my grandma is shipping statues and masks. You know, how crazy is that? I find the whole project learning to be really empowering, like ultra empowering, right? And I think it's humanizing to education too. It's a purpose. It is problem solving. It isn't rote memorization. It isn't A, B, C, D, E on tests. It's real life problems. That's awesome.
Well, and we keep telling, like, you guys are going to be voting soon. So if you want to solve our problems here in Salt Lake City, you got to figure out all the steps in solving those problems. So let's solve them over there. And you've got to make them self-sufficient. You've got to help them make that next step. And one day in class, one of my kids just goes, you're doing this because this is what you want us to do, right? I'm like, yes, in your life. I want you to be self-sufficient. I want you to be problem solvers. And he just goes, do I get a gold star? And I said, you get 2 for today, but that's really what I want. And so, and it's a pretty amazing thing, because, you know, I look back when I was in school, there wasn't the Zoom and there wasn't Google Earth and there wasn't all of that. But for my students, it is. And so the world is so much smaller now for them. And so I just think, man, if you can feel like you did an impact on one little tiny village, then this is all the better. So I write lots of college scholarship letters for these kids, because they earn them. They're pretty remarkable. It just is.
Well, I think when you talk too about how education has changed since you were a kid, since I was a kid, we have to change the way that we teach. Like, I don't know, for me, sitting in rows and listening to my teacher was enough, but we gotta do other things and switch it up. And you're doing that. And like you're saying, the world is a smaller place and a better place because of what you and your students are doing. You're breaking down those classroom walls and bringing people together. You're teaching them how to compare and contrast and format an email, but you're also teaching them the importance of empathy in life and seeing people as people, right?
It's been pretty remarkable. You know, it's interesting when you have a class of kids that are born and raised here in this country, and then you have maybe a 4th or a 3rd of your class that are refugees or immigrant kids. And you start doing a project like this, and they kind of sit there on the outskirts for about the first day or so. And then we start saying, okay, now tell us what it's like. What is it like to do this and this? And then pretty soon I would have like 1 or 2 refugee kids say, well, I'm from the Sudan and this is what it's like. And I'm from Kenya and this is what it's like. And they get this chance now to feel empowered. Like, I'm sharing my story. And this is what it's going to mean for these kids there. And our classroom community is pretty tight. It's classroom management goes down with project-based learning, which is pretty remarkable. But it gives you that touchstone to keep going back to. And it was really exciting because in our school at that time, they actually did a writing project where they would write the first part of an essay and they would send it over there to them. And you have to wait on time, you have to wait on power, and you have to wait on all of that. But eventually we would get it back and they would write the next part. And my kids would put it down and go, wow, they're smarter than us. Like, look at the grammar. And I'm like, yeah, okay, so what do we got to do? And they're like, okay, we got to do better. Okay, I got to show them I can do this. And all of a sudden, like, project-based learning took on a whole new meaning. And now I can't divorce myself from it because I know the power of having something like that for kids to grab onto. That I know that when they leave me, they're going to forget how to diagram a sentence. And I know they're going to forget who wrote the Constitution. I know they're going to forget all of that because they're going to Google it on their phone. But what I hope they're going to remember is like what they did in Ghana. Like, that's what I'm hoping, because I think they're going to just be these great responsible adults.
Stephanie, this has been so much fun, and your passion for education is just infectious. And I would love for a minute, to be in your room and participate in your class. There's a lot of educators that are really struggling. You get on any social media platform. Josh and I were talking earlier, and there seems to be a lot of negativity around education. What advice would an educator like you, who's clearly passionate about education, clearly passionate about bringing humanity back into the classroom with their students, making us global citizens, what advice do you have for those teachers that may be experiencing some times of trouble or wondering why they got into education in the first place?
Oh, it's hard. I think these last 2 years have been the hardest years of teaching that any of us have ever experienced, because all of a sudden you had to reinvent everything that you've ever taught, where you could be in there and be in close proximity with your students. And I've watched a lot of teacher burnout through all of that thing. But so we actually had a big conversation about this with some of my teacher friends. And the common theme that we kept going back to is that we simplified what we taught. And we went back to things where the kids could feel safe. So we went back to things that felt true to that classroom. So it might be, okay, we're gonna start class by writing, but we're gonna write about this. And we really started focusing on the social and emotional. And then one of my students one day said, well, what do you do for your social and emotional? And I said, that's a really good question. So I should probably be doing this with you, right? And they said, yeah. And so I sit down and I do it with them. So they'll be writing their writing prompt about how do we go to school when COVID's going on or this is going on. And so we all write together, and then I join a group and we all share, and then we come back out. And I found that the more that I simplified what I was doing, and the more that they saw me as a student as much as a teacher, that my burnout started going away. And for a lot of my teacher friends, it's kind of been going back to that. Like, we're going to simplify. I want my kids to see I'm making mistakes on Zoom. I'm making mistakes in Canvas. I'm a student too. So you help me, and then I'm going to help you. But it's a lot of that. It's like really showing your vulnerable side to the students. Like, I don't have this figured out, so you help me, and I'm going to help you.
I think that that's a really important thing for all of us to remember, because a lot of the times we get caught up in the, if they're taking that 10 minutes to write, oh, I could get this done right now. I could get this done right now. And just, man, taking a breath and being there with your kids, like you're talking about, and writing with them and sharing with them and modeling all of these things for them. It's such a powerful tool that then, makes us feel better. It gives us our energy back. Our sparks are relit. And it goes back to just spending time with your kids, right? Like real time though, not teaching the standards per se, but
Yeah.
real human time with your students. Tom, you told me a quote you're going to have to finish it for me because I'm not going to remember it the way you said it, but it was something about like kids are going to get your time one way or the other. Do you remember telling me this?
The kids are going to get your time one way or another. Either you give it to them willingly, or
Mm-hmm.
you're going to give it to them on the back end of some kind of behavior, some kind of issue. And
Yeah.
so, I think what you're doing is absolutely, what you're saying is absolutely true. Give it to them. Kids are there. They want your time. They want to know that you care. Um,
Yeah.
and so you're going to give it to them one way or the other.
Mm-hmm. It's true.
Well, Stephanie, I have loved our time tonight. I have loved listening to you. We always ask one question at the very end. What
Ah,
does the world need now? Back
you know
in
what? I actually had my students write about this because I've watched these podcasts. And so I had them
awesome.
write. And I said,
I love it.
whoever comes up with the best answer to make me sound really smart, I was bringing in giant candy bars. And so I got everything from A to Z, but which was really, it was pretty enlightening to hear what they had to say.
Yeah.
Um, but one of the best ones, and then we built on it in the class and we talked more about it and we really fleshed it out, was that every single person in that classroom is part of a community and they come from a community. And if people realize that we're all part of a bigger community, whether it's in your neighborhood, in the classroom, in the house, and if you act like everyone there matters, whether they think differently than you, they worship differently than you, they look different than you, but it all matters. And if you give them that respect, then that community gets better and it builds out and it builds out. And pretty soon that community is so strong that nothing is going to break it. It's just not. They're going to weather the storm. They're going to weather all of that. And one of the kids said, I think too many people forget we're part of a bigger community and that community's got to go through. And so then they actually started drawing their community out. And pretty soon we were on the floor drawing more and more circles of where that community goes, from the community in the shopping store, the community in their house, their jobs, and it went all the way over. Somehow it made it to Ghana, which was a really cool thing. But I think, I think that's what the world's got to remember, is that we're all part of the same community. We all need clean air and oxygen and all of that stuff, but we're part of this community. So if everyone's building each other up and learning from each other, we're just going to have this community that can weather the storm, I think.
I love it. I absolutely love the fact that, one, you got your students involved with it.
That's really bad. I'm sorry.
No, I don't think we've ever been like a classroom discussion like that.
That's
So I
pretty awesome.
absolutely adore it. I think it's absolutely awesome. But thank you. This is amazing. I think the more respect we can give, and we can't lose the focus that we are all part of a bigger community. It's not about us. It's about something bigger.
It is. I need those elementary school teachers to be there. I need those. Everybody needs that. And you just need to feel like your small part is enough. And then we're going to build on that small part and do it.
Stephanie, I want to thank you so much. You started out telling us that story about your son and how that moment changed your life, and now you're living out his dream. I've had a rough week with some of my class. This is what I needed tonight, was to sit down and really listen to the way that you're changing the world. So thank you. And I know your son would be so proud.
He's the real teacher. I really do a lot of the grading. And sometimes I think he could make it easier for me, because that grading can be a bear sometimes, but he would have been an incredible teacher. I know he would. And so he left some pretty big shoes to fill. But I know in the middle of all of that mess in education, sometimes he would have been in his happy place.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's our show. Thanks for tuning in this week. We're so thankful and appreciative that you took your time to listen to our guest, Stephanie Hunt. Hopefully you're ready for another week of changing lives, and hopefully what the world needs now is helping you to sustain your inspiration as we journey through this school year. If it is, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. It helps us to continue to get inspirational educators' stories out.
We hope that as you head out, you remember the biggest factor that plays into student success is you. Your love, your passion, your empathy, your dedication is exactly what the world needs now. Thank you for all you do. Have a good one.